This is Common Sense Generation. Common Sense Generation. Hi guys, this is Common Sense Generation. I'm Kądzielska-Koper, and I have a wonderful guest with me here, Benedict Rogers, straight from London. We talk about China and breaking human rights there. Benedict, you just published a book, China, the Nexus. So just showing on how many levels Chinese state is breaking human rights right now, and I would say even more since last 10 years. Tell us about it.
Well, thank you so much. It's great to be with you. China, I first went to China when I was 18 years old in 1992. And at that time, even though it was just after the Tiananmen Square massacre, the 35th anniversary of which we mark this year, nevertheless, in the 90s and the early 2000s, there was a sense that China was beginning to open up, to relax. There were more freedoms, limited, but still more space for civil society and for religion and others. But in the last decade or so, all of that has gone, and China has really closed, become much more repressive domestically, but also much more aggressive on the world stage.
I stop you here, but you're right. So even this exchange of students, exchange of journalists, it happened when Deng Xiaoping made us open China, created the special economic zones such as Shenzhen, wanted to become, at least in some limited spaces as Singapore, was talking to, for example, Lee Kuan Yew, was talking to American leaders. But what Xi Jinping is doing, especially after the Olympics, it looks like he's totally crossing out the testimony of Deng Xiaoping and coming back to Mao's times.
That's exactly right. For example, he has resurrected the whole cult of personality that existed in Mao's time. Under Deng Xiaoping and subsequent leaders, China was a much more collective leadership. But now under Xi Jinping, we're back to a sort of paramount supreme leader, cult of personality. He's much more ideological than many of his recent predecessors. He seems more focused on repression and political control, even than on economic growth. He's returned China to, in many ways, something like the Mao era.
It wasn't a deal between society, Chinese society, and the government that we allow this economic miracle, but you are getting richer, you're getting better jobs, you get out of the poverty, which of course Xi Jinping is doing. We also see this very full of propaganda videos when he goes somewhere up to the village which never was visited by any politicians, and he brings civilization there. But right now, China is going to the economic crisis. So it's not only becoming poorer, but it's also becoming even more politically restrained. And here we come to your book and the topics which you show on so many levels. But let's come with the most extreme ones. And this is the case of Uyghurs and Xinjiang. And as you said, the form of genocide. Tell us more.
Yes, so what we've seen in Xinjiang over the last decade or so is a dramatic intensification of the persecution of the Uyghurs that has existed for decades, but it's gone to a new level. So the creation of effectively concentration camps where there may be as many as 1 million, possibly more than that, Uyghurs incarcerated, and incarcerated for simple day-to-day things like basic acts of religious expression. They're predominantly Muslim people. Basic things like praying, reading the Quran, fasting, abstaining from pork or alcohol. Those are all things that could lead them to be incarcerated in the concentration camps. But even more seriously has been a campaign by the state of forced abortion, forced sterilization. Those are the two things that particularly lead experts to say this is a genocide, because there's a clear intention to destroy at least part of their population.
Before
also
we
forced
dig
labor.
more into this topic, because this is, of course, extremely interesting, but also horrifying. But this thing, in the history of China, China used to be a very tolerant country. Even when we read Pearl Back, the Nobel Prize writer, she describes stories of Jews in China who lived in a huge, with free practices. Before, as China, of course, was a monarchist country, but with a huge tolerance in the provinces for other people. They were more integrating. Even the last dynasty was not a Chinese dynasty, but they were incorporating into Chinese culture. So China used to be like a country which more takes in than a sort of restrain and not allow people to practice. But what I'm sort of troubled about this Uyghurs topic is the fact that there are other Muslims in the China which are not prosecuted, but sort of this government puts so much pressure and want to destroy the nationality, this nation of Uyghurs, like even not on the religious background, but on I don't know which background. What do you think is your opinion? Why suddenly the government wants to get rid of the Uyghurs?
Well, it is extraordinary, and you're right about China's history, and even in the earlier communist era, people have said to me that yes, they previously faced discrimination and some persecution, but nothing on the scale that they face today. I've had some Uyghurs say to me, we could live under Deng Xiaoping, we could live under Jiang Zemin and Hu Jintao. There's also the example of Xi Jinping's own father, who took a much more progressive and enlightened view of the Uyghurs. And he said, if we want them to love, he was still a communist, so he wanted the Chinese Communist Party to prevail. But he said, if we want them to love the Chinese Communist Party, we have to treat them well. And it seems Xi Jinping didn't learn from his father. I think that Xi Jinping has a mindset of just wanting absolute total control of everything, doesn't want any dissent, doesn't basically want any diversity. He's pursuing a campaign of Sinicization of actually all the non-Han Chinese populations under Chinese territory. So it's happening in Tibet, it's happening in Hong Kong with efforts to reduce the use of Cantonese and promote Mandarin. In Tibet, we're seeing Tibetan children being separated from their families and forced into boarding schools where they have to speak Mandarin. They're denied to practice their Tibetan Buddhism. And the same is happening in Xinjiang. And it's all part of Xi Jinping's Sinicization campaign.
Which is very scary and also sort of against the whole Chinese civilization, which always embraced the diversity and was never something like one Chinese. Mandarin, of course, is right now used, but all of other Chinese languages were out there and they could flourish since generations. And right now, this huge unification, maybe because, I don't know, Xi Jinping wants his portrait next to Mao's at Tiananmen Square, but because of it, so many people suffer, and the most who suffer are Chinese people. You said during the lecture that you're not against China and you're not against the Chinese culture, which I share with you, this fascination of this extremely interesting culture, civilization, the philosophy, the way of life, the way of how to treat the body, the medicine, the language, the writing system, everything which this civilization brings is absolutely amazing. But right now, Xi Jinping wants to destroy it on so many levels. We touched the topic of the Uyghurs, and you're not only a writer and a journalist, but you are also a very active human rights activist, and you managed to to work, or at least you were a sparkle to create this international tribunal when it comes to the genocide in Xinjiang for Uyghurs. Tell us in details what was the verdict of this tribunal.
So this came about because increasingly people were saying what's happening is a genocide. But a number of us were concerned that it's one thing for an NGO or an activist to say it's a genocide, or even for a government, which the United States government, both the previous administration and the current administration, have done. But we felt that there was a need to create a mechanism that would determine whether or not it's a genocide from an entirely independent, objective standpoint, so that Beijing cannot just disregard it as the agenda of an NGO or the political agenda of a government. So I approached the British barrister Sir Geoffrey Nice and introduced him to some Uyghurs and asked him if he would look at this question. And he said, why don't we form a tribunal? So he created a panel of entirely, firstly, very eminent, distinguished people in their fields. Not all of them lawyers, some lawyers, but some academics, medical experts, and others, but none of whom had a previous agenda on China. So they couldn't be accused of being anti-China or having some political agenda. And they held a whole series of hearings over the course of a year. They heard hundreds of witnesses, both survivors themselves, but also experts. They had thousands of pages of written testimony as well. They had they operated a bit like, it was a sort of quasi-judicial mechanism, although of course it didn't have any status from any government or judiciary, but it functioned like a courtroom with a counsel to assemble the evidence. And they then reviewed the evidence and produced a judgment. And I remember going to listen to the presentation of the judgment. And initially, Sir Geoffrey Nice, who, by the way, had been the prosecutor of Slobodan Milosevic, so he really understands, genocide and atrocity crimes. When he presented the judgment, he went through meticulously, line by line, every charge and every sort of count of genocide. And initially, he went through them and he said, on this charge, genocide is not proven. On this charge, genocide is not proven. On this charge. And I was beginning to get a bit worried because I'd had a hand in getting this set up. And I was thinking, this is not going the direction I expected it would. And finally, he came to the charges of forced abortion and forced sterilization. And he said, on these points, genocide is proven. And I think that's the real strength of the Uyghur Tribunal judgment, is that he didn't throw the word genocide around loosely. It was very meticulous and methodical and lawyerly. And on those other points, he wasn't necessarily saying it wasn't genocide. He was just saying the evidence didn't yet meet the standard of genocide. But on forced sterilization, forced abortion, it did.
This is Common Sense Generation. If you like this channel, please subscribe, share, and comment. Your voice really matters. So it's really a direction of actually to limit the growing of this nation.
Exactly.
And I know it sounds actually horrible. I know that also the Uyghurs women are forced to marry Chinese Han, so they produce Han children, and this goes in this direction. So the nation is sort of taken into the, as you mentioned, into the Han nationality, which is extremely scary and of course barbaric. And just to think about it, it already has goosebumps. And I'm really, really fortunate that we live in a free world. But I would say, looking at the fact that these prosecutions comes closer and closer, I think we cannot feel safe anymore saying that we live in a free country, because 20 years ago, everyone thought that Hong Kong is an oasis of freedom. It was one of the most free market port in the world. It was a flourishing city which was under the British administration, but with this economic miracle, as we know, one of the Xiao Silong, to one of the 4 small dragons, which was also wonderful places which everyone can flourish. The government, the economy grows. And right now, Hong Kong is a scary place with national security law, where people who made this economical success, such as Jimmy Lai, are in prison, prosecuted, and probably going to face the life sentence. So I know you worked for Jimmy Lai. I know you worked for Apple Daily. I know you knew him personally. So let's bring up this case. Tell us more about him, because it's extremely scary.
Absolutely. Jimmy Lai is one of my heroes. He's the most remarkable man. He's 76 years old now. He's actually a British citizen, which I think is an important point to underline. And his whole journey is incredible. He escaped from mainland China during the famine in the Mao era at the age of 12 as a stowaway on a boat, arrived in Hong Kong, worked as a child labourer in garment factories, and then worked his way up, established his own business, a very successful chain of clothing stores called Giordano. And then he went into the media business and started Next Media and then Apple Daily. And he did that because he was inspired by the protests in Tiananmen Square in 1989 and thought, how can I contribute to the struggle for democracy, and thought that if he started a pro-democracy media outlet, that would give people information and ideas and promote democracy in that way. I came to know him basically in 2017 when I had tried to make a visit to Hong Kong. I had previously lived in Hong Kong the first 5 years after the handover, but I went back in 2017 and I was supposed to have dinner with Jimmy and a number of others. Unfortunately, I was denied entry to Hong Kong on the orders of Beijing, so I didn't get to have that dinner. But Jimmy then reached out to me the next time he was in London, which was a month or two later, and invited me to dinner in London. And then we met quite a few times over the years until his arrest in 2020. And one amazing thing was that in 2020, when the national security law was introduced, a little while after the law was introduced, he asked me if I would write a weekly column for the Apple Daily's English language media outlet online. And so for the last year of its existence, I wrote for the Apple Daily once a week. It was the best publication to write for because it's the only one that I've ever written for that never gave me a word limit, never limited what I could write about, and never censored me. So I was completely free to write whatever I wanted. I remember I wrote my last piece for them literally the day before the police raided the newsroom, and a few days later the newspaper was shut down. Jimmy was arrested at the end of 2020 and has spent the last 3.5, coming up for 4 years in prison on multiple fabricated charges. And that now, right now, having gone through various other sentences, he's on trial for the most serious charge, which is under the national security law, which could very well mean him spending the rest of his life in prison. I've actually been named, along with a number of other foreign nationals, in the trial as a collaborator. And the evidence, I mean, this illustrates just what a sham trial it is, because the evidence that the prosecution has put forward is, just as one example, there are dozens of examples like this. They produced a WhatsApp message from Jimmy to me in 2019, which predates the national security law, asking me if I could ask the former British governor of Hong Kong, Chris Patten, if he would provide a comment to Apple Daily journalists. You know, a perfectly normal thing for a newspaper publisher to do. And somehow this is presented as evidence of Jimmy's collusion with foreign forces. So his story is amazing. His current situation is tragic. And I really hope the international community will pay attention to his trial and step up efforts to secure his release.
I absolutely hope so about it, because he's an example of sort of Socrates of our times, because he could easily escape. He had enough money, connections just to fly away a week earlier, but he did it, and he was there with ordinary people of Hong Kong. He didn't want sort of to leave them, so he was at the beginning of the protest, very often just as a first person going in this huge crowd, with the danger, because we knew the police were very brutal against the protesters, so anything could happen to him. But he was there he didn't want to leave the people of Hong Kong, because they have to live under the this national security law, which is a law which is against any the most basic rule of Roman law, which is the fact that the law doesn't work back. It doesn't work back, so it doesn't affect things when it's right now created. Doesn't affect things which I've done 20 years ago, and this, of course, works like this. So any of us could be charged with anything right now, even for doing this video podcasts. And unfortunately, it's already against the national law in Hong Kong. So this is crazy. So we have those two topics, as you mentioned, also Tibet. So as you see this sort of restrictions which the government is leading to and taking, do you think there's a limit of it? Do you think there will be any sort of stop when the government says we don't want to cross this, or we want to go reverse? Or is it at this moment that Xi Jinping is already a dictator who wants to lead China to the new North Korea?
Yeah, I definitely, he is already a dictator, although the strange thing is there was somebody a few months ago who, I think it was President Biden actually, who called him a dictator, and then somehow this was a controversy that the word dictator was used, which was very bizarre. There's no question that he's one of the worst dictators of our times. I think that I didn't think things could get much worse after the national security law in Hong Kong, because that was already so draconian. But now Hong Kong has introduced another security law on top of that, just in the last month or so. I think if the free world continues with its approach of kowtowing to Beijing and not challenging its behavior and not putting in place consequences for its actions, then the regime will simply be emboldened to continue its repression and continue its aggression beyond China. And, I think the threats to Taiwan, but also the threats to Western democracies are growing. If the free world decides actually, and there are some signs that people are starting to wake up to this, if they decide actually we need to confront this challenge, and, for example, imposes targeted sanctions, which the US has done to a certain extent, but we need more of from others. Targeted sanctions, diversifying our supply chains, reducing our dependency on China. Those are the kind of things that might get the regime to stop and think, and perhaps at least not go any further than it has.
Because the outcome, the current situation is an outcome of the policy of Henry Kissinger somehow, and the fact that we agreed America agreed to support economically China, to connect in creating this Chi-America, as experts sometimes refer to, sort of close eyes to, and not to breaking the human rights, in order to use China as a place of very, very cheap labor. And China was used this way for many, many decades. Of course, it was a country who was in huge poverty. And we know that this huge Asian societies are the most afraid of chaos, and not, so they are eager to give up some personal freedoms in order to live in some sort of safety, because with so many people living around you, it's very easy that things slip away and people and the life gets more dangerous. So, but on the other hand, just asking to wrap up this episode, but I'm a huge fan of intellectual thoughts and books of Lee Kuan Yew. And Lee Kuan Yew said that, so the leader and the first prime minister of Singapore, for our viewers to know, he said that the communism, the huge Chinese civilization, is like a mosaic. So, and it already exists, let's say, 4,000 years or 6,000 years, he said, even counting on the very origins of the civilization. And the communism is just a scratch on it, which exists 100 years. That the rain will come, it will wash it out, but what stays is Confucianism. But Xi Jinping is against Confucianism, isn't he?
Yes and no. I mean, I think he has tried actually to co-opt Confucianism. And of course, the Chinese Communist Party has these Confucius institutes around the world that are essentially a front for Chinese Communist Party propaganda. I think he's taken bits of Confucianism that appeal to him and then mixed it with Chinese communism, which is not therefore Confucianism. So is he against it? I would say he's tried to co-opt it.
So to take first of all, the leadership and the fact that you are so submissive. I mean, a citizen is so submissive to the leader, but without all the important parts of Confucianism, such as, first of all, that the leader needs to be like a father to the society, and this is not only to punish them, but moreover to take care of them.
Yes. And
if he doesn't take care of people of Xinjiang, if he doesn't take care of people in Tibet or in the people in Hong Kong, then, and of course we have this huge case also of the previous cases of so many female babies which were in the history murdered because of the communism regime and the restriction of one-child policy. So put all of this together, it's truly like the Chinese Communist Party is against the Chinese nation themselves. For you, the last question is, we are sitting here in Europe, or let's say in the Western world, all of those problems of China, we can say those are not our problems. We have our own things. So what we can do here, we are not, let's say, not going to support our friends in Hong Kong because most of us don't have friends there. So what we can do?
Well, first of all, I think we need to recognize that what happens in China does affect us. One of the ways it affects us is the growing transnational repression, the growing reach of the Chinese Communist Party to threaten both the diaspora communities, whether they're Hong Kongers, Uyghurs, Tibetans, exiled Chinese dissidents living in Western democracies. And even not just the diaspora, but foreign critics. I mean, I myself have received various threats in the UK coming from the Chinese Communist Party. So it does affect us. And I think if we allow it to continue unchallenged, it will only grow. And we've seen in recent weeks some very serious, what I've experienced is nothing by comparison with the evidence of cyber attacks on our parliament in the UK, on the European Parliament, the Electoral Commission in the UK as well. So what China does is affecting our freedoms and security. But to answer your question, what can we do? I think, listeners certainly should become aware of what's happening in China, should raise these issues with their elected representatives, members of parliament, to get them to speak out. I think as consumers, there are things we can do in terms of trying to be, it's not easy, but trying to put pressure on manufacturers of day-to-day brands that we all buy to stop sourcing them in China, or to at least make sure that they're rigorous in ensuring that forced labor is not used in the supply chains, and to boycott those products unless we have those assurances. So those are a few of the things we could do.
So the most important is awareness, and this what you brings through your book and for your articles and other statements. So thank you very much for amazing work you're doing. We keep fingers crossed that you flourish and you reach as many people as possible. And to you, this was Benedict Rogers, book author and a human rights activist in Common Sense Generation. I do hope you liked it. And what we recommend is, of course, reading his newest book about Chinese Nexus. And I thank Polish National Foundations for making this podcast possible. Thank you for watching. This is Common Sense Generation.